Okay. Emmett Fox wants us to start with a reading from Matthew.
Chapter 7.
Okay, 7:21 through 23. This is the Lobster translation, so somewhat different than what you'd expect elsewhere. So it starts, "It is not everyone who merely says to me, 'My Lord, who will enter into the kingdom of heaven?' But he who does the will of my Father in heaven. A great many will say to me in that day, 'My Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name cast out devils, and in your name do many wonders?' Then I will declare to them, 'I have never known you. Keep away from me, O you that work iniquity.'"
We are all willing to do God's will sometimes and in some things, but until there is a complete dedication of one's whole self, there cannot be a complete demonstration. There is no home for the soul in which there dwells the shadow of an untruth, said George Meredith. I'll repeat his quote. There is no home for the soul in which there dwells the shadow of an untruth. Never is it more true than in the life of the soul that the price of liberty is eternal vigilance. We must not allow any consideration whatever, any institution, organization, book, or any person to come between us and our direct seeking for God. Centers, churches, schools all fill a useful purpose in providing the physical framework for the distribution of right knowledge, but the actual work must be done by the individual. And this is to repeat a part of Matthew's Gospel. Not everyone that says unto me, Lord, Lord, shall enter into the kingdom of heaven, but he that does the will of my Father which is in heaven.
Quite a challenge, isn't it? Well, today we're going to sort of extend something that I've been talking about more or less unwittingly on and off over the last several months. I have referred frequently, if you've listened to past talks, to the fact that we're all made of God stuff, we're all made of star stuff. And then I came across an article that asked the question, what if absolutely everything is conscious? And as I read the article and thought about it, I started remembering the various approaches of Aboriginal peoples, where, for instance, the animal they just killed for food, they give thanks to the spirit for having provided it, to the spirit of the animal for having grown and allowed them to have its flesh. Indians in the Northeast Pilgrim era would put a small fish in the hole with the seed of corn they were planting to nourish the corn, and they would give thanks to the fish for what it was doing. And of course there's the fairly common prayers to Mother Earth. Well, there's actually now a technical term for this, and the beginning of a return to considering that maybe there is a consciousness in everything. The word is Panpsychism, psych being mind and pan being everywhere. And excerpts from Wikipedia. Panpsychism holds that mind, or a mind-like aspect, is a fundamental and ubiquitous feature of reality. It is also described as a theory in which the mind is a fundamental feature of the world which exists throughout the universe. And panpsychists posit that the type of mentality we know through our own experience is present in some form in a wide range of natural bodies. And to some extent, animism fits that. But for the Western world now, it's a fairly radical idea. But while it's new, it's also old in the Western era. The Duchess of Newcastle in the 1600s, Margaret Cavendish, well, first of all, she was outlandish in her time, even going topless to operas and things like that. And in 1666, she wrote the first ever, or what is recognized as the first ever work of science fiction called The Blazing World. But she believed at a fundamental level the entire universe was made of just one thing, matter. Well, so how does that sound with what we're talking about? That we're all God stuff. And that matter wasn't mostly lifeless or inert, but rather animate, aware, completely interconnected, at one with the stuff inside us. In essence, in other words, her argument was that it wasn't just humans who were conscious, but that consciousness in some form or other was present throughout nature, from animals to plants to rocks to atoms. And she's not the only one at that time period who was coming up with that. The Jewish philosopher Baruch Spinoza did, and a Dominican friar, Giordano Bruno. And his writings were so threatening to the Catholic Church that they burned him at the stake for it. But part of his argument was that humans don't occupy a privileged position by dint of having consciousness. If we humans have a soul, was his reasoning, then there is nothing that does not possess a soul. And what they were coming to conclusion fits with philosophy that's been around East and West pretty much forever. You can find traces of it in Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism, Shintoism, Christian mysticism, and even the philosophers of ancient Greek. Plato and Aristotle, for instance, the Stoics, St. Francis of Assisi, whom we all heard of. He was so convinced that everything had a conscience that he tried to preach to flowers and birds. William James, the father of American philosophy, Alfred North Whitehead, the British mathematician, Max Planck, the physicist. So, and even Thomas Edison. He was quoted as saying, "It seems that every atom is possessed by a certain amount of primitive intelligence." So that was then, and then Christianity became rational and started cutting our ties, whereas the indigenous, our ancestors, spoke to Mother Earth, spoke to the sun, spoke to the plants. Christianity decided that anything that was goddish needed to be up here, separate from us. And that has led to a lot of breakdown in our relationship with the rest of God's existence, God's universe. There's a current philosopher, Philip Goff, who is bringing back arguments for the idea that everything has conscience. And he notes that in the last 10 to 15 years or so, this scientific reliance that everything is just matter and you just have to understand matter and that's all there is, it's being repeatedly disrupted by new scientific breakthroughs. There's cephalopods who show playfulness and creativity. There are the fungi and various plants in the forest who interconnect and share information back and forth. They found that honeybees recognize faces, use tools, make collective decisions. We all know that they dance to communicate. And they seem to understand higher level concepts like zero. I remember reading about that and really scratching my head. I don't remember the study, but they understood what zero meant. Plants can feel when you touch them. And one evolutionary ecologist, Monica Gagliano, has suggested that pea plants, based on her studies, can learn behavior, can identify the sound of running water and then grow toward it, and they communicate between themselves with clicking sounds. So, with this sort of scientific question raising, it also means that panpsychism addresses a difficulty that pure scientists, pure materialists have struggled with. Neuroscientists from the materialistic side have struggled and have always struggled to figure out how inert matter, which is where we all started from at the beginning of the earth, could ever give rise to consciousness, because it's I guess a scientific maxim that you don't get something from nothing. There's always a precursor, and they can't explain how consciousness shows up. And the beauty of panpsychism is, if you believe that consciousness resides even in the atoms, even in nature's tiniest building blocks, then it's easier to explain how, as they accumulate together, we end up with higher and higher levels of consciousness, of intelligence, which leads us to the whole thing of evolution. And so one philosopher has broken it into a 6-step logical progression. Consciousness is real, and we know that from our own experience. Everything is physical, because there's no evidence that there's something immaterial. Therefore, consciousness is physical. We don't get something from nothing. There's no radical emergence from nothing. Consciousness emerging from totally non-conscious stuff can't happen, because that would be something or nothing from nothing. And therefore, all stuff must have some consciousness baked into it. So, going into some scientific research, there's a scientist named Michael Levine who is a skeptic, or was, but he studies slime mold. Slime mold is a single-cell organism, no matter how big it is. It's found oozing over forest floors, and it's got no brain, it's got no nervous system, and yet it can make remarkably smart decisions. One of Levine's studies, they would put slime mold at one end of a maze and a yummy treat like oatmeal flakes at the other end, and they actually have recordings as the slime mold starts branching off the various directions through the maze with its pieces of itself, still a unity, but going different ways, until it figures out the best route. And then it pulls everything back and takes the best route to get to the goodies. No brain, no nervous system. Another one, they put oat flakes on a table, heaps of them, in a layout that geographically resembles all the population centers of Tokyo. And then they let the slime mold loose. And lo and behold, it figured out the most efficient route to get to each pile of treats, to each of those cities. And what it created was a remarkable resemblance to the Tokyo subway system. This from something that officially has no brain, no nerves. And there's other studies too. They did one where they put the treat at one end of a bridge and the slime mold at the other, and then they lined the bridge with caffeine, which slime mold does not like to be near. But when the slime mold got hungry enough, it ventured across the bridge to get the oatmeal. And from that point forward, caffeine didn't bother it at all. It learned caffeine wasn't something to be scared of. So think of this in terms of everything around you. There was another study with the flatworm. It's got a tiny brain. It hates the light, and so they put it in a container in the dark, which it prefers. But then they'd shine a light on one spot and put a treat. It happens to like liver. They put a treat in the middle of the light, and sooner or later, the flatworm would go into the light to get the treat, and then later on, the light didn't bother it. Anytime there was a treat, it just went right there. Well, then they took the brain off. Now, the thing about flatworms is they regrow everything, including a head and a brain. So when the flatworm had regrown a head and a brain, they did the same thing. The light didn't face it a bit, went straight to the treat. So something beyond the brain was at work. And plants, similar things. There's a plant that if you jar it, it folds all its leaves up. Well, they started dropping the plant onto sponge rubber or something that didn't hurt it. And at first it folded up the leaves because of the jar. After a while, it didn't fold the leaves up because it realized this wasn't going to be harming it. So there's now a paper out, has been for about 5 years, titled Consciousness, Here, There, and Everywhere. So what disconnected us from this awareness? Well, according to Goff, the philosopher, the disconnect came from ideological reasons. Christianity, as it was approached by the rationalists, separated humankind from nature and established the belief that we were superior to everything and could exploit it, use it any way we wanted. You may remember some of the people that Trump appointed, like the Secretary of the Interior, whose stated belief was we needed and deserved to exploit every single thing in the ground, even if it was sacred by Native American terms. And so we essentially cut ourselves off from the ancient paganism that believed that everything had God within, and that before one cut a tree or dammed a brook or did anything to nature, one had to address the spirit there to placate it, to apologize, or whatever. The spirits in natural objects, which were of the natural objects. And from the Christian standpoint, all that evaporated. It didn't matter. And thus, our respect for nature went away, crumbled. And this philosopher claims that Christianity is the most anthropocentric religion the world has seen. I'm not so sure. Looking at Muslim, for instance, Baha'i, I'm not aware that they have any relationship with the earth either. But what does this mean for us? We as a community here are open to seeing the Spirit, experiencing the Spirit everywhere. As I was writing this, I realized that long before I was aware of Panpsychism, I always felt that I ought to give thanks to those things I was using, give thanks for service if they had run their course. And, we have books for the needy. A book that is no longer of any value is going to have to be recycled. I always thank it for what it has done and wish it well where it's going. And, 25 years ago I was given a Ford van to use in our work. And it felt like we had a relationship, and we made a deal together. I would never push it beyond its limits. I would take good care of it. and it would always get me home. And in 20 years, it never once, while I was in it, broke down. There are a couple of miracle times. One in particular, we were in northern Tennessee doing shows, and at the last show we noticed that there was a little water under the car. We checked the fluid, topped it up a bit, and every 400 or 500 miles we'd stop the car and look underneath. Got home, an 8-hour drive, parked in front of the house, came in for bio break, went out to unload the car, and the whole parking lane was awash with coolant. Turned out the top of the radiator had completely split from the rest of the radiator, and yet it held the water in until it got us home. You can bet I give thanks to that. And another time, similar long trip, and the minute we crossed the bridge and we hit the Ohio line, the muffler broke off. There wasn't a sign before, not a pop, pop, pop or anything, but right then, it knew we were home. And then finally one day, it said, I can't do this anymore. And so we let it go and we gave it thanks. Think in terms of your own relationships with things. If you can accept the idea that everything has consciousness of some level or other, how might that change how you interact with them? What respect you give them? I'm going to try to do more like giving thanks to something when I'm using it or when I'm about to make use of it for the service it's giving, which I've not thought to do up to now. I'm going to try to give more respect myself. This whole idea can give us a more, if you will, enchanted view of God and the world. And if we choose to live with the idea that all around us has conscience and can, one way or another, be part of our God stuff, relating to our God stuff, I think it would be much harder to feel utterly abandoned or lonely, or for that matter, to destroy that which is around us wantonly. And then as I was finishing writing this, I came across a quote by Paul Buckley. He sends out meditation quotes based on Quaker principles every Wednesday. And if you'd like to receive those ideas from, they're wonderful for meditation, let me know, because he's very happy to add other people to his mailing list. I'll just pass your email along to him. But here's the quote that showed up and is absolutely perfect for the finish. From Lloyd Lee Wilson. The entire cosmos moves in harmony with God's purpose. We, as individuals, can live and act in ways that further or hinder God's intent. That's what I've got to say. Anything anyone wants to contribute?
I'd like to say something.
Go for it.
Okay. So, in general, I'm really careful about not throwing usable things away. I learned that from my parents. They grew up in the 30s and 40s in Germany, and my dad said they didn't even have a garbage can. They had no garbage can. But a couple of times I have thrown things away, and later I thought I really could have, it's possible that somebody else could have used that particular item. So I'm just going to be extra careful to really think before I throw things out. And but I do like the idea of consciously thanking what I use. And I do every now and often, every or so often, bless things, like bless items in the house. And I like that practice too. Thank you.
Somebody else with contribution? Yes, Bob.
I really enjoyed your talk because it's something that involves spirituality and science. And your discussion about consciousness, basically, I think as you pointed out, there's energy and there's matter, and we look at ourselves as being matter, but actually we're energy beings in contact and be able to communicate with energetic forms. And we don't really think about it that say that when we die, when we pass on, our consciousness is in a form of a waveform, which carries information. And I guess probably most of us here today have either witnessed or done some mediumship. And you ask for Aunt Sally to come in, and all of a sudden you're getting all kind of information, right? Where the hell did that come from, right? So, and you talked a little bit about time, that things evolve over time, and which is true from our viewpoint. But the universe has no time. There is no time. There is no distance. That's a creation of us in order to live our lives. So that's about what I have to say. But I liked your last sentence, about God's intent. God's intent, only intent, is love. Period. That's it. So thank you very much.
Yes. And boy, can we hinder God's intent when we set our mind to it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Anyone else with a contribution? Liz, yes.
I wanted to say
Okay.
thank you. I wanted to say thank you, Brian. That was an excellent talk. I have my parents grew up in the Depression, so I heard a lot about that. So I don't throw a lot away, don't have a lot of garbage, but I do have a bag or a box that if I'm willing to let go of something or need to let go of it, I put it in there and call Vietnam vets or a place like that. So I very much enjoy passing things on and saying thank you.
Yay.
Very good talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Anybody else? Dear God, thank you for the wisdom we've been able to share today, for the love we've been able to share, for enabling each of us to learn something more to help us grow in our connection with you, to better serve you, to better resemble the love you give everywhere. We thank you for guiding us this week, for giving us our sustenance, for lifting us up, for enabling us to joy more, and for guiding us back where we can share time again as this wonderful community. We say thank you, thank you, thank you, dear God, for your love, for being in us and of us and us with you, and for allowing us to have this life to grow and learn, enjoy, and love, and have fun. Amen.